Hi guys, this video is 3.1. We're talking about parallel lines cut by a transversal. So remember, parallel lines are just two lines that are going to have the same slope. They're going to be the same distance apart. They're never going to touch or cross, right? And then a transversal is just a line that cuts across other lines. Okay, so that's the transversal. Now when we take two parallel lines and we cut it with a transversal, it creates these 8 angles. I guess even if they're not parallel, it's still going to create these 8 angles. But these angles are going to have special relationships with one another because of the fact that the lines are parallel to each other. Okay? So let's talk about the angle pairs that are created. So the first type that we're going to talk about are called vertical angles. Now vertical angles are going to just be across from each other whenever two lines cross. So like angles 1 and 4 here are vertical angles. Angles 2 and 3 are vertical angles. 5 and 8 are vertical angles, and 6 and 7. Now those type of angles are always going to be congruent to one another. So if you remember, congruent means they have the same measure. They're equal to each other. Okay? And then the other relationship that we're going to have throughout this little thing is supplementary. And remember, supplementary angles add up to 180. So we'll say they're summed to 180. Okay? So all of the angle pairs, when the lines are parallel, are either congruent or supplementary. Vertical angles are going to be congruent regardless of whether these two lines are parallel, because they don't really have anything to do with the parallel lines, right? They're just anytime two lines cross. So vertical angles are congruent. Then we have something called linear pairs. Also the linear pairs, sometimes called just supplementary angles. Linear pairs are not going to be dependent on the lines being parallel, but will always be supplementary, right? Linear pairs make up a line together. So like angles 1 and 2 are linear pairs, angles 2 and 4 are linear pair, angle 3 and 4 are a linear pair, and 1 and 3. Okay, and also we have 4 that come from down here. Any two angles that are right next to each other on a line are called linear pairs, and those are going to be supplementary. Okay, remember, the number of degrees in a straight line is 180. So anytime you have two angles that make up a line together, they're going to be supplementary. They're going to add up to 180. All right, so then we have something called alternate interior. Alternate interior angles are going to be on alternate sides of the transversal, and the interior means inside, right? So it's inside the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal. So like 3 and 6 are alternate interior, 4 and 5 are alternate interior, and those are going to be congruent to one another. Okay. Then we also have same side interior. So they're still on the inside. They're still between the parallel lines. Sometimes they're called consecutive interior. And consecutive interior or same side interior, they are like 3 and 5 and 4 and 6, and those are going to be supplementary angles. They're going to be supplementary to one another. Okay, so let's go ahead and then we're going to talk about, we have 1, 2, 3, we have 4 pairs, so we need 2 more pairs of angles. I'm going to quickly erase this and we're going to quickly sketch it out again. So we've got our parallel lines, we've got our transversal, we've got these 8 angles. Okay. The other type that we have are called alternate exterior. So they're on the outside of the parallel lines, but they are on opposite sides of the transversal. So that'd be like angles 1 and 7 and angles 2 and 8. And alternate exterior angles are also congruent. Okay? And then lastly, we have something called corresponding angles. Corresponding angles are going to be in the same position, just on separate parallel lines. So like angle 2 and angle 6 are corresponding, angle 3 and 7 are corresponding, 1 and 5 are corresponding, because 1 is on the top of the parallel line on the left of the transversal, and same with number 5, it's on top of the parallel line and on the left of the transversal, and then 4 and 8 are corresponding. Okay, and corresponding angles are also congruent. Okay, so it's just kind of a matter of memorizing these names, memorizing which ones are congruent or supplementary. I mean, honestly, you can kind of tell by looking, because all of these pairs, if these lines are parallel, are either going to be congruent or supplementary, again, as long as the lines are parallel. And notice here there's kind of a larger angle, and then there's kind of a smaller angle. So if you can see that you have two angles that are both kind of larger, like 1 and 5 are the larger angles, you're going to know that those are congruent because they both are larger. And then if you have two smaller angles, like 2 and 6, they're both kind of a smaller angle, less than 90, so you're going to know that they're congruent. But then if you have one of each, so like I have 4 and 5, 5 is the one bigger than 90, it's kind of the larger angle here, 4 is the one smaller. If you have one of each, then you know it's going to be supplementary. Okay, so the closer that our transversal gets to being perpendicular, right, you're not going to have a smaller and larger angle. Those are all going to be 90. So if you're having trouble telling if it's pretty straight but maybe not quite 90, just draw one that's pretty exaggerated, and then it becomes more obvious by looking which ones are supplementary and which ones are congruent. Okay, and then lastly, we just need to quickly talk about parallelograms. So we can think of a parallelogram as lines cut by transversals. But all a parallelogram is it's a quadrilateral, meaning a four-sided shape, where the opposite sides are parallel. So if I call this A, B, C, D, okay, line segment AB, which I could notate using a little line over it, AB is parallel. So if you see these two vertical lines, that means parallel to DC. And also AD is parallel to BC. Okay, if that's true, then this is a parallelogram. We can kind of think of AB and DC as our parallel lines, and AD as a transversal, or BC as a transversal, or vice versa. We can think of AD and BC as our parallel lines, and then they have a couple transversals. But if we look at those properties, that gives us some properties of parallelograms that kind of come out of that. One of them is that opposite sides are congruent, right? If I put one dash through each side, that means these two sides are congruent. So opposite, let's do some properties here. So property 1 of a parallelogram is that opposite sides, opposite sides are congruent. Okay, property 2, opposite angles are congruent. So opposite meaning across from each other here, so like B and D are congruent angles because they're opposite one another. And then our third property is that consecutive angles, so consecutive just means right next to each other, so like B and C would be consecutive, C and D would be consecutive. So consecutive angles are supplementary. So for example, if I take angle A and I add angle D, it should equal 180 degrees because those are consecutive angles. Likewise, angle D plus angle C equals 180. Angle C plus angle B equals 180. And then lastly, angle A plus angle B equals 180. Okay? So those are our properties of a parallelogram, and that's pretty much it for this section. So we'll see you next time.